Hello, and welcome to this session on top tips for writing. My name is Beverly, and I'm a part of the All-Stars team, and these are my co-authors. So, let's set the scene. It's the beginning of the lesson, and you're looking at the lesson objectives with your learners, and you say, today we're going to do some writing. How do your students react? What do they say? Here are some reactions from my students. Do these look and sound familiar to you? And then you show them the task. Here it is. Here, it's got information that they need to include in their writing, but you may get something that looks a little bit like this from your students. Individual sentences, there's no connecting of ideas there. There's some issues with spelling and verb forms. So how can we help our students go from this to this and help them to become confident writers in English? Well, first, let's look at why our students find writing so challenging. Writing involves a lot of different skills, and these are just some of them. Our students need to access appropriate structures and vocabulary. They need to think about how they're going to organize their text, linking their ideas together, organizing ideas into paragraphs. They need to think about the correct spelling of words. They need to plan their writing, edit their writing, and they need to use their imaginations. So these are a lot of skills that are needed to produce a good piece of writing. And I think we can compare developing writing skills to developing skills in other areas. For example, sports. Before they get on the pitch to play a match, football players practice individual skills like shooting at the goal, dribbling, passing the ball, tactics. So we need to break down the writing process into the different writing skills to get our students practicing them separately so that gradually they'll be able to bring them together and become more confident and more autonomous writers. So let's have a look at a framework that can be used with any type of writing task, whether it's a story, an email, or a description, a writing framework that can give the students the support that they need in the writing process. It's a framework that's got 4 stages. First, students look at a model text, and then we get them noticing language and features of the text before moving on to a planning stage and then an editing stage. So let's have a look at that first stage. Students really need to know what is expected of them in the writing task, what the finished product should look like, and using a model is a good way of doing this. But before looking at the text as a model for their writing, we need to engage the students in the topic, in the theme of the text, as we would with any normal reading text. And in this example, I've taken out some key words so that the students can predict what the story is about. By looking at these words, what do you think this story might be about? And then students read the text, and here it is. A few weeks ago, Sean Curry, a homeless man in California, was looking through the rubbish bins behind a coffee shop when he found a wallet. Although he needed money, he decided to call the owner and return the wallet. At first, the woman gave him some money to thank him for returning the wallet. And then her 12-year-old granddaughter, Michaela, asked people to donate money for Sean instead of giving her a birthday present. But so many people wanted to do more for Sean, so Michaela and her mom created a website and raised thousands of dollars for him. Finally, Sean found a place to live. "I'm really happy," said Sean. "I have a job now and a home because I did the right thing." Afterwards, the students can check their predictions, obviously. And this is a true story. So you could get the students engaging a bit more with the story and giving a personal response to it. For example, how did they feel about the story? How did it make them feel? Which character, which person in the story did they admire the most? What would they do in a similar situation? Now, the next stage is getting students noticing useful language features in the text, features that eventually they would be able to transfer to their own writing. So looking at this text, what features would you draw your students' attention to? I picked out these features. Time phrases, which are very important in helping the reader to understand the sequence of events in the story. If you've worked on the past simple, the contrast between the past simple and the past continuous in previous lessons, you could ask them to find an example of that contrast using the word when in that first sentence. I've also picked out linkers. And this encourages students to have a look at how these ideas are connected, how these linkers are used to connect the ideas in the story. In order to practice these features, you can get students identifying all the time phrases or all the linkers in the text. They could add others that they know to the list. And then you can give them some activities to help them practice these features. It could be matching beginnings and endings of sentences, or completing gapped sentences with the words, or gap texts, short gap texts. All of these activities help the learners to focus on the meaning and use of these language features. If the students are working on emails, they could look at the beginnings and endings of emails. They could look at, if it's an email inviting somebody to do something, they could look at the language of inviting or the language of making suggestions. This task here gets the learners thinking about how the text is organized. By going back into the text and finding the answers to these questions, they're looking at where that information is located in the text. Is it at the beginning, the middle, the end? And these questions will also be useful in the next stage. So the students have seen a model text and they've worked on some characteristic language and features of that type of text. So they are ready to write their own text. Okay, and here is the task. But you really need time to think of ideas, to use their imaginations, to think about how to incorporate the language from the previous stages that they've been focusing on into their own text. What they need is planning time. And this is a step that they really need to be trained up to do. I don't think it comes naturally to them. And we can give them some questions to guide them in their planning. And of course, then they write their text. So your students have planned now, and they've written their stories. So I have a question for you. What usually happens when your learners finish a piece of writing in class? What do they usually do? Well, in my experience, their hands go up and they say, finished. So the final stage, the editing stage, is a crucial one. Another crucial stage. If we want our learners to become more autonomous writers, we need to encourage them to get into the habit of going back, reading their work, and checking it. And again, our learners don't do this naturally. They may say, but teacher, how can we do that? And this is where a checklist comes in handy. If we go back to our story task, this is what the checklist might look like. Have I spelt the past simple verbs correctly? Okay, so a little focus on spelling. It could just be, have I spelt all the words correctly? Grammar. Have I used at least one example of the past continuous? Well, past continuous we focused on in previous lessons. I'd like to encourage them to put that into their story. And also, please note I've given them a minimum, at least one example. So I think this caters for all the students in our class, maybe those students who are a bit weaker in writing and those who are more proficient, who may be able to include more than one example, but it's achievable for all students. Have I used some time phrases to order the actions in the story? Again, going back to language that was practiced in previous stages. Have I used at least 3 different linkers? Again, linkers that they focused on, but also at least 3. So again, we're making this achievable for all of our students. And in fact, if our students see this checklist, if we show it to them in the planning stage before they start writing, and then they use it to check their writing when they finished, then they have a much better chance of success. They know exactly what is expected of them. And we can use the checklist too to assess their writing, to make sure that we are only assessing and commenting on what the students have been working on. So let's recap the framework. Students look at a model text, and we help them to notice certain features and give them an opportunity to practice those features. Then students have time to plan their own text, thinking about how to incorporate the language from the previous stages, and with the support of some guiding questions to help them, and the checklist. Finally, students check their work, referring to the checklist. They may go back to rewrite, correct, or add more language if necessary. And then, when they are satisfied with their own assessment of their own work, then and only then can they raise their hand and say, finished. The writer Doris Lessing once said, "You only learn to be a better writer by actually writing," which is true. As with any skill, we learn to do something better by doing it. But by using a framework like this, we give our learners the support they need at this stage of their writing development, by breaking the writing process into more manageable chunks and giving them the tools they can use to be more successful and more autonomous on their journey to becoming confident writers in English. And these are some of my top tips for helping our students develop their writing skills. Thank you.